All right, I think we can go ahead and kick this off. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me today. My name is Court Tompkins. I'm CTO here at IP Configure. And this will be a brief webinar to talk about what is new in the latest release of Orchid VMS. So our latest release is version 23.6. It was released a few weeks ago. Has one big new feature in it, that is our event system, as well as a number of other changes, and we'll highlight what those are now. All right, so before we get started, I'll just do a brief recap of the Orchid architecture. Orchid VMS comprised of a couple of different pieces, and we're going to talk about each of those pieces as we explain the new features. The first major piece is called Orchid Core VMS. That is our recording software. So that's the software that's going to run on an NVR at a individual facility or a location, so something like a school, inside a manager's office, at an individual store or restaurant. So this is the software that's actually responsible for saving video, interacting with cameras. This software has its own user interface that allows you to view video and really get the full Orchid experience, but it's restricted to a single site. There's a companion product called Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid, kind of the same thing. It really just depends on how it's deployed. That is our management interface. So all of the features that are available in Orchid Core are also available in the management interface, Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid, except those products layer on additional functionality. So there's some extra enterprise functionality, and they also aggregate sites together. So if I'm using the Orchid Core interface, I only see the camera and video for the location that I'm at, whereas if I'm using the management interface, I'll see video from all of the Orchid Core NVRs that are attached to the bigger enterprise system. So a little bit of background. All right, so the latest release of Orchid Core is version 23.6. As I mentioned, that's been out for a few weeks now. And a couple of interesting new features. The first that we're kind of excited about is we can now play audio and hear audio in the browser through a WebRTC connection in Orchid. We're talking about Orchid Core now. Again, this also applies to the management software. So through the management web interface, I can also hear audio as well. So Orchid has recorded audio from cameras basically since day one for years now. You've been able to save that audio. You've been able to hear that audio if you exported video and played it in a player like VLC. But beginning with 23.6, we can now hear that audio inside the web browser when you're viewing live or recorded video with WebRTC. So here I've got an example image of some video that probably has some audio in it. If I hover my mouse over the player on the Orchid stage, you'll see that we now have a new icon in the camera title bar, and that's a speaker icon. So if a camera has an audio stream available and it's on the stage, by default, that audio will be muted. I click the speaker icon, and now I hear audio in the browser. So users can turn that audio on and off as long as the streams are configured to record audio. There's a couple of different audio codecs that your cameras might use for recording audio. Our preferred codec is going to be G.711. It's a basic audio codec. It's probably going to be the default on your camera if you configure it to record audio. G.711 makes sense for us because it's a standard that's well supported by the cameras, and it's also a standard that's supported by the browser. So all of your major browsers can natively play and decode this G.711 audio. There's another type of audio codec or encoding method called AAC. Tends to be slightly higher audio quality. Most cameras support AAC. Unfortunately, browsers do not natively decode AAC. That still works, though. You can still configure AAC cameras and hear them in the browser. There's a transcoding process that Orchid does in order to transcode that AAC audio to G711 when you're listening to it in the browser. That transcoding has a very small CPU load that the browser incurs. So generally, we will recommend that you use G.711, but AAC works as well. So yeah, new in 23.6, we can now hear audio in the browser. Also new for this 23.6 release is we have sort of upgraded our license type for ARM devices, so it behaves exactly the same as Intel devices. So previously, we had a license model for the ARM architecture that was really designed around being a community product. So it was a licensing terms that allowed you to add unlimited cameras and unlimited storage on an ARM device, as long as it was a standalone instance. And the idea is we wanted to foster sort of a community around Orchid running on low-cost single board computers, things like Raspberry Pis that use these low-cost ARM processors. And that's something that we were happy to do, but what we found over time is that increasingly the capability of Orchid running on one of these ARM CPUs, because these ARM CPUs have become so powerful, is now fundamentally equivalent to Orchid running on a traditional x86 64 Intel processor. So beginning with 23.6, the licensing terms for Orchid running on ARM has become the same as Orchid running on an Intel CPU. And just as a sort of interesting anecdote, when we first released the ARM edition of Orchid, it was targeting the Gen 1 Raspberry Pi. So this was many years ago. And this was a device that probably had the horsepower to record maybe 2 cameras at 720p. So a little bit of a hobbyist toy at that point. We've now seen ARM processors become increasingly powerful. ARM is very common in data center applications now, to the point where IP Configure's pure cloud recording solution, which is called Orchid Alto, runs in Amazon Web Services on ARM hardware. And a single Orchid instance running on one of those enterprise-grade ARM CPUs can support up to 200 cameras. So again, really, this ARM architecture has become equivalent to the Intel architecture, and we've updated our licensing terms to match. So beginning with 23.6, if you're running on an ARM processor and you're running without a license, in our trial mode, you're limited to 4 cameras and 128 gigs of storage. Same as the Intel version, and you can buy a license to unlock unlimited storage and a given camera count, just like the Intel version. All right. Now the main event, so to speak, and that is the new events system in Orchid. So our event system is fundamentally a new way to find and review video in Orchid beyond our stage. And we'll take a look at a live demo here in a second. So what this allows us to do is pull in metadata from some external event and associate it with a camera inside Orchid, and to be able to navigate my video by events, right? So to be able to find a type of event that I'm interested in, click on that event, and then view the video from this events list. And then there's 2 different event sources that we now support in Orchid through this event system. The first is ONVIF metadata. So ONVIF is the camera streaming standard that we support. And modern cameras generally are going to include a number of embedded analytics, and a lot of the larger manufacturers also have an apps platform within their cameras so that you can install third-party computer vision video analytics systems, install them in the camera, and those systems will generate events that Orchid can then pull from the camera stream that it's recording, and we now see those events inside the Orchid interface and can use them to navigate video. So the major camera manufacturers like Axis and Hanwha and Bosch and iPro, they all have camera analytics, and this event system is a way to navigate the results from those camera analytics inside Orchid. We'll see that in a second. The second sources of events are completely external events that we can ingest through like a webhook mechanism. So we'll see this where administrators can go in, define an event type inside Orchid, and they'll then get what we call a webhook URL. You can take that URL, put it in your third-party system, whether it's an access control system or a video analytic, and that URL becomes an address for that third-party system. Anytime it has an event, it uses that URL to post a notification to Orchid about that event, and then Orchid is able to associate that event with cameras and video inside the VMS. So here in this screenshot, we see an example of the event system, but what we will do now is actually go straight into a a live Orchid VMS system and look at the events interface directly. All right, so right now I am at the sort of existing way to navigate video in Orchid on what we call our stage. So let's see, I will open up my camera bag here. I can take any one of these cameras, drag it out to the stage, look at live video. If I want to go back in time, I can zoom out on this timeline bar, drag it to the past, look at video in the past. You'll see on the timeline bar, we have these red ticks that represent motion events. I can use those to navigate video based on motion. Now with 23.6, we have an additional way to navigate video, and that is this event system. So if I click our system menu here in the top right corner of the Orchid screen, you'll notice that in addition to the stage, we now have as a top level feature, a section called events. So I've clicked on events, and now I see a list of these either OnVIF metadata or external webhook type events that we've configured in the system. And now this is a new way to navigate video. So each one of these events has a name that the system administrator has configured. It has a category that helps us organize events by things like, access control events, point of sale events, people detection events, object detection events, etc. It has a list of cameras that the event has been associated with, the date and time that event happened, and then a state. So either the event started or the event stopped. So here, this is a camera inside our warehouse here at the back of IP Configure, and I have events that have been configured to trigger anytime somebody enters the door area here of this warehouse. So I can click on any one of these events, and we immediately begin playing that event at the time that it occurred here in the player in the top of the screen. So I get some information about this event over here on the right. We have what's called an OnVIF topic, and that's basically a description of the event that we're listening to through this metadata protocol. This is an Axis camera. So I see that this is coming from Axis's camera application platform, or ACAP, if you're familiar with Axis cameras. And we see this as a result from Axis Object Analytics. That's a video analytics package that can be installed on Axis cameras. So yeah, this is a great way to navigate video. If I'm only interested in activity that occurred in front of this door in the warehouse, I've got an analytic running on the camera, much more sophisticated than just motion detection, that's giving me a list of events that's easy to navigate. I'll scroll down here, find some other events on the system. So here we have somebody who configured an analytic to detect a vehicle on a camera. We called this train enter. So this is a camera view that has a railroad track in the background. So we have an analytic that should trigger every time a train enters the scene. And indeed, we do see a train entering and moving through the scene. Here's an analytic called EV parking. So this is an event that's been configured to trigger anytime a vehicle enters the scene. This is our parking lot here in the back of the office. All right, so if I'm interested in only specific type of events, you see a filter button here on the right side of this events view. I can show only certain categories. So maybe I have some alarm type events configured. I can only show, I can set this up to only show alarm events. Perhaps I'm only interested in events involving doors. So I can only show my access control or my door entry events. When I click on any one of these events, I have this player here at the top, and this is kind of a fully featured version of the player. So you get all the same controls that you would get on the stage. I have a timeline bar that lets me scrub through video around this event. I can fast forward and rewind at different speeds. I can also export video from this view as well. So I can download video for the event that I'm interested in. All right, so that is the events feature at a high level. This is from the Orchid core interface. I'm going to go into the Orchid hybrid interface, the management server. Really the same behavior here. Again, I have an event section here in my user interface. One difference, though, is that because we are now in the management server where I could have multiple recording servers configured, I have the ability to select the server that I'm interested in. So this is a management server that has 2 different recording servers configured. So I'm going to pick this server called the events testbed server. I'm now looking at events from that particular server. Other than that, the behavior is really very similar. So let's take a look at a couple of other event types that are just simple examples here. So let me filter by an alarm event. I believe we've got some loitering events configured here on the camera. So this is a loitering event that's set up. Let me scroll down. I want to find an active loitering event. And indeed, we've got somebody standing around in front of the counter. So again, if you've got video analytics that are producing meaningful results, and many of these cameras do that, in fact, this can be a much faster way to find and navigate video than just going on the stage and sort of blindly scrubbing around the timeline bar. So anyway, a very useful way to integrate external events into Orchid. In this demo, we're really just looking at analytic type events, but of course we can integrate anything. So any system that either adds ONVIF metadata to a camera stream or is capable of posting its events back to a third-party system like Orchid through a webhook. So that includes point of sale, access control, all sorts of external events. Doesn't necessarily have to be camera analytics. Actually, yeah, before we go on to the next topic, let's take a look at the configuration interface for events. So right now I'm logged in as a system administrator. So in addition to this events page, which is where I go to view events, there's also an events subscription page, which is where I go as a system administrator to subscribe to events that I want to bring into Orchid. So here in this example, I have a number of events that Orchid is now listening for. Each event gets a name, it gets a category. We flag the type of event, either it's an ONVIF event that's coming through that camera metadata, or it's an external event that a third-party system is posting back into Orchid. And if it's an ONVIF event, I see what's called the ONVIF topic, or basically the name of the metadata event that we're looking for. So if I want to add a new event type, so a new camera event type that I want to appear inside that events view, all I have to do as an administrator is create a new subscription. We're going to start with an ONVIF event here as an example. So there's an ONVIF event that I'm interested in. I'm going to give this a name. We're going to call this Court's Awesome Event. I'm going to pick a category of the event. This category is really just for ease of use for your users to be able to find events that they're interested in, and also to provide consistency of event types between servers. So if you have a large enterprise with hundreds or thousands of servers, I want events across all the servers to have similar categories to make them easy to find. So I'm just going to call this a movement event. Let's see, I'm going to scroll down. I know that this front door overhead camera has a ONVIF analytic installed on the camera that I'm interested in. So that's the event that I want to see, or that's the camera that I want to look for events on. And I now have to pick a ONVIF topic. So a camera is going to have all sorts of different events that it's going to be able to send to Orchid. This really varies by manufacturer. I believe this is an Axis camera, so I know that the metadata, computer vision, video analytic type events are going to be under the camera application platform. And indeed, this camera has a 3D people counting event that I'm interested in. So that's the event that I want to see here in my event system. I'll click next. I can pick multiple cameras that I want to associate this video with. So I've got the events coming from that overhead camera. But now what video do I want to associate the event with? In this case, I definitely want to associate it with the video from the camera itself, but maybe there's some other cameras that have another view of that same area that I also want to be able to view. So I can select those cameras as well. Then when I click on my event, I'll have multiple cameras whose video I can view. And that's it. That's all I have to do to now have a camera subscription for this specific event type and see it in my events list. In this case, we already have a subscription for this camera, this ONVIF topic, so it's not letting me add a second one. But that's how that works. Similarly, if I have an external system, like a point of sale or an access control system, I can create what's called an external event. Very similar process. I have to give it a name. I have to pick a category. Let's pretend this is an access control system. So I want to call this a door event. I've named the event. I've given it a category. I now have to pick a couple of cameras to associate this event with. These are the cameras that I'll see when I click on the event in our event section. I click save, and that is it. The next thing I have to do is grab this webhook URL. So this is the address that your third-party event is going to send information to whenever that event happens. So then Orchid can associate the event with video. So typically, again, the configuration is going to vary depending on your system, but most access control or point of sale systems are going to support webhooks, and I'll be able to paste this URL into that third-party system. And anytime an event in that third-party system happens, it'll send that information to Orchid, and I'll see it in my my events view. All right, so that is events at a high level. Also new in Orchid 23.6, a couple of small but important features. Orchid's RPM installers, that's a Linux installation package, are now compatible with the OpenSUSE Linux distribution. So we've supported both Ubuntu, CentOS, and Red Hat for a number of years now as supported Linux distributions, versions of Linux that Orchid can be installed on. We're now also supporting OpenSUSE. So slightly less common Linux distribution or Linux version, but very common with, still common with enterprise customers. Also new in Orchid 23.6 is WebRTC retransmission is now enabled by default. So that was a new feature that we added in the previous version of Orchid, version 23.3. Anytime we're adding a new feature that interacts with the way that video is saved or streamed, we like to introduce that feature disabled by default because retention of video and video integrity is kind of the most important thing we do at IP Configure. So we like to roll that out on a little bit of a trial basis before we turn it on by default for everybody. This WebRTC retransmission has been a great feature for us that improves the reliability of sending video over a slow network. It's been deployed at thousands of locations now since the last release, and we're now enabling it by default for everybody. All right. So that's what's new in Orchid Core VMS. That events feature has really been the focus of our engineering efforts over this last quarter. So while we do have a few new things that were specific to the management interface, they're relatively small. The big new thing in Orchid has been that event system. So anyway, we're talking about now what is new in Orchid Hybrid, Orchid Fusion, Orchid Alto. That's our management products, the latest version 23.6. So we're continuing to work to improve the scalability of the hybrid interface for customers with lots and lots of cameras and lots of connected recording servers. So we have a new permissions group dialog inside the Orchid Hybrid interface. So this is where I go to configure granular camera permissions for users and groups. So for example, if I have a group of loss prevention managers that are in some region, and I only want them to have access to certain stores and maybe even only certain cameras in certain stores, I would go into the permissions group section of Orchid Hybrid to configure that. You've been able to do that in Orchid Hybrid for years and years now. But if you had a large number of installations, we're talking thousands of servers, it wasn't as sort of scalable as it could be. It took a lot more clicking around than perhaps it needed to. So we now have a revamped permissions group dialog that has paging, it has search. You have a large number of servers or cameras, say on the order of hundreds or thousands of servers, this will work much better for you. And finally, this is kind of a behind the scenes change, but one that is important, definitely worth talking about. Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid are both Java applications, so they use Java. They're written in Java. And a Java application requires a library to be installed on the server that it's running called the Java runtime environment. So it's all the sort of Java libraries that a Java application needs to run. Up until now, on Linux distributions, Orchid has relied on the Java runtime environment, the Java libraries that have been provided by the operating system. That's given us some issues because we like to use the sort of newer, most performant features available in Java to make Fusion and Orchid Hybrid as capable as possible. And it's also given us issues for Linux operating system vendors, distribution maintainers who have not kept their version of Java as up to date as we would like. And those versions include things like bug fixes and vulnerability patches. And beginning with Orchid 23.6, we've sort of taken those updates into our own hands, and we now bundle all of those Java libraries together with Orchid Fusion. So if you're installing Orchid Fusion in your enterprise, you now are no longer relying on the version of Java that's provided by your operating system, which in our experience might be a little out of date. You're now using the most recent version of Java that's included with Orchid. If for some reason, due to enterprise policies, IT policies, you want to use a different version of Java, that is still possible. It needs to be Java 17. That's a recent version of Java that can be overridden. So you can set some configuration properties and point Orchid to use your version of Java, but now out of the box by default, we are bundling Java together with Orchid Fusion. So final small change here is there's some improved caching behavior with Orchid Fusion. Previously, the camera thumbnails that you would see in the bag when you opened up the camera bag in Orchid Fusion, those used to be cached in memory. For most installations, that's fine. For very large installations where you might have hundreds of thousands of cameras deployed, that in-memory cache, in our experience, just became a little bit too big. We needed to move that off the disk. So now in those very large installations, we'll see reduced memory usage because we're now keeping those small camera thumbnail previews on disk instead of in memory. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for joining. If you have any questions about Orchid, either the features or issues with the new release, we've got a number of resources available to you. We've got an extensive online training curriculum available at training.ipconfigure.com. We've got beautiful searchable online and PDF versions of the manuals for both Orchid Core and Orchid Fusion at manuals.ipconfigure.com. You can also go to support.ipconfigure.com to see a knowledge base. If you want to talk to a human being about questions or problems with Orchid, we have our tech support center here in Norfolk, Virginia. All of our tech support folks are US based and here in Virginia from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern time. They are standing by, ready to take your call. And you can also submit a ticket at ticket.ipconfigure.com.